Meow, I'm Huples Cat. Welcome to the Prepper Book Club. We're reviewing this book from 2020 from Selco Cowern. We've reached chapter 3 and we're going to look at wilderness survival. Although it's by far the largest chapter in this book, a lot of it is kind of redundant and not very good information, so I will be going fairly fast and this will be one video on the entire chapter. There wasn't much meat here. Page 133, if it's hot, work at dawn and at night. I agree with this, but however, a huge solar flare or a huge volcanic super eruption, you might want to consider doing something different. You can add into this a nuclear war if you survive it. There won't be any ozone up there for quite some time, several years. So you're only ever going to go outside at night. If you have to go out during the daylight, every patch of skin is covered and really have dark welding glasses on. Cataracts and blindness and skin cancer is going to go through the roof, both for human beings and surviving wildlife, and even plants. If you can, cover all your soil with plastic sheets and don't go out there except at night. On page 135 they conveniently list a lot of trees that need water. This is to help you spot those trees and go and find water. Again, it's location dependent. If you're where I am, look out for white birch. Or just listen. You could often hear waterfalls and loons from quite some distance away. Or of course you could just go for a walk in the forest for about 10 minutes and you'll probably find water. The merging of urban and wilderness is throughout this book, which is just fine, I think. I can cope with that as a reader. Selco Cowern in urban areas say gather rainwater. It's supposedly clean and safe. Well again, if there's been a supervolcano or a nuclear war, that may not be true for about a 3 to 6 month period. Wherever you are in the world, try and find a spring or a well that you can access in a disaster or complete shutdown of electricity in society, so you can at least get fresh water that's not contaminated. You never know what the disaster's going to be. One of the reasons I recommended this book so highly is on page 141. Put snow in a pillowcase and let it drip near a fire. I can say that you have to be aware that snow and ice into the home will decrease the temperatures, so you can only do this if you can manage to keep the temperature very hot. On page 145 they say add alcohol to water to sterilise it. This is an interesting use of alcohol. Depending on water availability and sources, this would likely become a thing again in SHTF. What they don't do is tell you the percentage of alcohol you need to add to adequately sterilise the water. Well, I'm prepared just in case. However, I will point out to you, getting scientific information from preppers is often hazardous for your health. This book, I suspect, isn't just what they actually know for certain, but what they've read up on and what they think would make good information for the book. They have not tested it adequately. For example, it's well known that alcohol makes water sterile and safe to drink. This is completely false. This is not true. The percentage of alcohol that you need to make water sterile, kill the viruses and bacteria, it's 60 to 90%. So it's not going to sterilise and make water safe. Adding a little bit of alcohol to contaminated water might make it more safe than just drinking out of the stream, but it in no way is going to sterilise the water. You're better off keeping the scotch to drink. However, if you have a little bit of bleach, that's a good idea. A little bit of bleach will actually sterilise water if you leave it for about 4 hours. And bleach, as we all know, expires after a year or two, becomes useless. So you need to know how to make bleach in an ongoing disaster. Again, people focus on the excitement of the disaster, but they don't really look at living for years with the disaster. I do think alcohol has a place in SHTF survival, mostly to get me drunk if I have to take your leg off with a chainsaw. Even more potentially harmful is on page 150 they claim that modern water filters remove radiation. A very few can, and they cost a lot of money. Bearing in mind, radiation is waveforms generated from the decay of an atomic atom. Very few filters will remove radiation from water contamination. This is one that claims it can. It's a modular system. It kept the instructions. This is the third of 3 modules. This is the one that will remove radiation. Only heavy metal atoms. Got this as a Kickstarter. It's a backup. I really hope I never have to use this. If I do, it'll be strictly just for drinking and only from drinking from contaminated sources. You need a Geiger counter for that. This is a water filter I do recommend for camping, hiking and in a disaster. It works very easily, it's very reliable. I've used this for years, I recommend this. But it really won't get rid of much radiation in the water. On page 154, I agree about water tablets, but there's something about water tablets that most people don't know and Selco Cowern do not tell you. If you drop the tablet into water, you have to wait about 4 hours for most water for it to be purified. Now if it's extremely clear water, maybe you can get away with an hour or 2. But there's one thing about using water tablets that people don't mention. If you drop the tablet into a clear bottle that allows sunlight in and leave it in the sunlight, after 4 hours you will strongly smell chlorine. However, it won't be sterile. It actually is deactivated from sterilisation by exposure to sunlight. So if you're going to use water tablets, make sure the bottle's completely occlusive to light or in your pack. Sodis, look it up. Sodis, very simple to use, very, very effective. There's a ton of information on the book about building shelters and the effects of hypo and hypothermia and how to deal with them. But if you are at risk from either hypo or hypothermia in a disaster, your prepping planning has gone very, very badly wrong. You prep and you act and you get stuff to avoid being at risk. Getting hypo or hypothermia puts you at risk of death. Try to avoid it. Now, I believe shelter after oxygen is the most critical survival need that most people would face, yet most people will focus on security and or food. Now, it does depend on the local weather because water might be the most critical thing after oxygen if it's very, very hot. In my opinion, rather than chopping down wood or finding wood and lashing together wood together to make temporary shelters, which aren't going to work very well, I think you should focus more on getting shelter that you can carry with you or entering shelter that's around you. I think you need to specifically train to get into shelter. I think you need to train in all weathers to get into shelter, and I think you need to buy much better shelter gear. Really look at ultralight gear, look at winter camping gear or desert survival gear. Get top-notch shelter gear. If you ever have to use it, you'll be very happy. And of course, you are out there camping in all weathers, so it's going to get some use anyway. I've said it before, I'm going to say it again. In most seasons, if I try to build a functional shelter in Canada to prevent rain and wind from getting on me in a survival situation, I will have to expend a huge amount of calories and time to do so. There he goes. I'm really happy we made this, and I'm really glad that we did, because it really needs a lot more work than what we did on it, and we did a lot of work on it. So as a survival shelter, this is a definite 0. Buy and carry an ultralight tent. Don't be fooled by thinking baby bag's going to work. Don't be fooled by thinking tarps work. In most areas I've mentioned before, especially near towns and rivers, you're going to be able to find small buildings which you can easily break into so you can sleep in there. These are used for utilities. A small crowbar will get you in. As I mentioned before, there is a fair amount of repetition in this book, and the border between urban and wilderness is very blurred at times. In the wilderness section on page 178 to 181, Selco and Cowern talk about urban shelters. I believe they implied but meant to say but did not say that all shelters that you're going to occupy in a disaster need to have 2 or more exits, or you will be easily trapped and will die in there if there's a fire or from violence. Something that was overlooked in urban survival, and I figured it might appear in wilderness survival because there is some blaring going on, but it has not appeared, is the availability and use of light urban industrial areas and large office towers. These can be used for both resources and shelter. Several months after the complete fall of society and there's been desperate looting, both of these areas will probably be great for hidden sheltering and also have lots of in and out areas so you will not be trapped. I was kind of hoping for some really interesting information on wilderness survival. I didn't really get it. For example, pages 181 to pages 204 are totally devoted to fire, how to make it safely, and in SHTF. No offence, but this is the one skill every human should have practice regularly. If you need 23 pages on this, I cannot help you. On page 183, you do point out that making a fire is going to paint a big target on you and your location. Do not have one inside a home unless it is essential to survive the cold. Even then, hide it if you can. On page 184, they give really good advice for actually having a hidden fire in an urban setting. Of course, it is a wilderness setting. This blurs. This is a firebox I made years ago because people actually online said you need to have a firebox, and there's no way I'd carry this around, but I kept it because it's a beautiful object. Inside this has various methods for me to light a fire. But on page 187, Selco and Cowern told me something I didn't know. I tend to use waterproof bags. But if this is wet, they claim that rubbing it on my hair will dry the match and I can use it. I'm not going to try this out. I don't really want to get phosphorus all over my skin. Even worse than spending 23 pages on telling me how to light a fire, they then spend 23 pages, 204 to 237, telling me how to get food. As you might expect, this is mostly devoted to finding, capturing, killing and eating other creatures. I would have liked a lot more discussion of diseases that you can get from doing this, but again, meat is protein in most people's minds and they can't live without meat, so hey, let's ignore reality. I must say good luck to anybody in a full SHTF that wants to live off meat and fish. Very early on page 207, they briefly show a chart and they talk briefly about plants as food. Yeah, 4 pages out of 23 on plants as food. Woefully inadequate. Though they do give good tips on how to avoid eating poisonous plants. People are scared of plants, but they're not scared of eating wild meat. I don't understand why. However, those 4 pages on how to test plants I did find inadequate for what I really need to know to test forage plants in all types of survival situations. Seriously, this needs a few of the many pages devoted to hunting methods which either won't work without years of experience or in areas with no wildlife. The number one thing not covered here? Learn edible plants and mushrooms in your area before the disaster. Have more than one decent ID book for plants and the same for mushrooms. Go to courses to ID them. Seriously, and read them. I'm much more likely to be able to eat a lily root than I am to be able to catch a coyote and skin it. However, did you know there's two types of water lily? Yellow and white? Did you know one of those types is deadly poisonous to human beings? Again, what we actually talk about as preppers isn't actually going to help us much in a complete disaster. Certainly some of the hunting and fishing measures mentioned by Selco and Cowern ain't going to work for you. Rather than burn the calories trying to kill poor defenceless animals that are going to infect you with prion disease or even worse with botulism, have a good think about this. What about sprouting seeds? You can store a huge density of sprouting seeds, you can plant them when you can, and they will yield more seeds. Way less calories spent to get way more calories in. That's the goal here. Don't starve to death. Can you imagine being in the forest in a complete and absolute societal disaster with a makeshift spear or even a gun trying to hunt a deer? Can you imagine how many other people are going to be out there doing the same thing? Wow, that's going to be unsafe. They finish up talking about cannibalism because according to them it's a very controversial topic, though apparently eating meat isn't. Meat's meat, and I kind of agree with that. You know, if you find safe human meat to eat, eat it. I don't actually think you should kill an animal, let alone a human being or anything else, to get their meat in a disaster situation. But some people will. Statistics show about 50% of people will. Be aware of that. Avoid those people. Well, that's it. Wilderness survival done and dusted. We don't need to know anything else about wilderness survival. I think you do. And I really do recommend doing a wilderness first aid course or wilderness survival course if you can. If not, there's plenty of stuff available online that you can use, including stuff like this, which is in fact a video series I did. So I hope you got something out of this. I hope you buy the book. I do think the book is actually worth doing, and I'm not surprised the wilderness section was completely... Selco admits that he turned this over to Cowern to do this because apparently Cowern's an expert in this, but I suspect Cowern is not quite the expert he thinks he is, just basically by how much his priorities are really screwed up if you're talking about a full societal fall. It's fair enough devoting pages and pages to hunting with spears, fish and rabbits and skinning and eating the rabbit, but not one mention of eating Cambrian bark. That's going to be available. The rabbit may not be. If you enjoy this series, please publicise it because nobody else is, and watch the next instalment, which will be on violence, because Selco and Cowern definitely know what preppers are interested in. Doodles. This has been a Wolfie Terrier production and a Gracie Cat production 2025.